Okay, so I'm here with Rocio. We actually just met. She's Dominican American, or were you born in DR?
I was born in Puerto Rico.
Okay, so you're not even Dominican?
Yeah, my family's from Dominican Republic.
This whole time I thought she was like.
No, I am Dominican. I was raised by Dominican parents. Both of my parents, my mom and my dad, are Dominican.
Oh, okay. So you were raised. Were you raised in Puerto Rico?
I was raised in mostly the United States. I lived here for a couple of years, and then I lived in Puerto Rico for a few years, and then I moved to the U.S.
Where in the U.S. did you spend time?
We first moved to Manhattan, and then I moved to the Bronx.
Like the Heights in Manhattan?
Yeah, Spanish Harlem at the time. But now, it's like a little gentrified, so it's changed significantly.
This is true.
Most of my life, I lived in the Bronx, in New York City, where there was like a bubble of Dominicans. And there still is, actually.
Right. So I wanted to talk to her. We met like very recently. We became like fast friends. We were talking about like culture shock in DR for people who are Afro-Latinx who identify both with like foreigners and with local Dominicans. And for me, it's been a little sometimes overwhelming because I feel like completely connected to like Dominican locals, and then I feel completely connected to like foreigners, and I don't know like kind of like who I belong to essentially. I know that sounds like weird to say, but we talked about like that experience, and for me like it was almost like this guilt, this feeling like of extreme guilt. Like it's like
that you carry with you around.
That I had all this privilege, and like it's like like I was complaining about stuff, like it was hard, and like these people, they don't even like, some people don't have a chance, like
they're born into their destiny.
Born into your destiny, and it's like you are lucky if you get out, and that's just is what it is. So wanted to get like your take.
I also felt very similar when I first arrived here. I started to question like a lot, like why did my family leave paradise? Like this is literally paradise. It's so beautiful, so rich in culture and diversity, and the landscape is just breathtaking. It's just unreal, like how rich the biodiversity is in the Dominican Republic. There's over 300 species of like plants and probably animals too, and I was just kind of like shocked the first few weeks, and then I went through a period of anger and resentment.
Can we talk about that? Like I was like, okay, like anger and resentment, like to who and to what?
I mostly I started to question, because I have a political science perspective, and I started to question the global social economic setup. I call it a system that was set up maybe hundreds of years ago, and I don't know, I'm not an expert in history or socioeconomic development, much less in like Dominican history, because it's been buried for many years. I mean, it's being still unearthed today.
And revisionist history is a thing too.
Yeah.
Changing the stories, making the stories.
And we're constantly rewriting history, especially Caribbean history. And I would imagine this extends to cultures that have been, and peoples, tribes, nations that have been repressed for hundreds of years. They're still rewriting history today. I can imagine. So I went through this period where I started to question like things became very clear in the Dominican Republic for me, because it's so obvious. You go to Loco Sosua and you see like beautiful Dominican women with like really,
you see that here. I've seen gorgeous
lighter men that are significantly older.
Yes.
I don't know if all of them are white, but I certainly can say that a lot of them are of European descent and
And
some
also
Canadians,
Black American
many,
men. I've seen
yeah.
Black American men.
And young Dominican men with much older women that are of lighter complexion, certainly. And so I was like all the phenomenons that you read about in history or you see maybe discreetly in countries that are above the equator become so obvious in countries like Dominican Republic. Yeah. You start to really question like who you are, where is your family from, and why they left paradise. So that was my...
And your family, were they well-to-do or like middle class? I know it's not much of a middle class here, but like were they... It sounds like there was no need for them to leave the U.S. Was there? I mean, leave the DR. Like, did they need to leave here for work opportunities?
I think there was a combination of medical access that was not very prevalent at the time in the country or in Puerto Rico. And also there was the desire to live and create the American dream, because at the time it was like advertised like this American dream of like owning a home and like going to great schools and having a great career. And this was definitely sold to like a lot of people in the world. So yeah, my parents left with the dream of a better life, seeking a better life than what they experienced here growing up in the Dominican Republic.
And you said they went to Puerto Rico first, which is I know there's this history of like Dominicans going to Puerto Rico. Like there's a lot of Dominican immigrants that go to Puerto Rico.
Yeah, I think Puerto Rico represented an entry preparation as an entryway into the United States, particularly New York City, because there was an influx of immigrants from the Dominican Republic to New York City. And before that, there was another wave of Puerto Ricans coming into the city, and before that, the Irish and the Italians. So yeah, New York City has experienced many waves of immigration, and at the time in the 80s, it was definitely like from the Dominican Republic.
And I also wanted to tell you all, like, Rocio is actually a robotics professional. And why did you come to DR?
Well, I initially came because I think part of me wanted to reconnect with the island and my culture, because when you move to the States, you kind of disconnect from island, the culture that you would find here on the
This is true. I feel
there's a disconnect.
There is a disconnect, but I also feel like in New York, it's one of the places that it still exists, because like for me growing up Panamanian, like my family made sure I knew history. They knew, like, they made sure I knew that I was Panamanian. Like, you know, they're like, this is black, this is like all the stories of like our grandparents and like some old wives' tales about cats being killers and like don't piss off a cat, like all of these little things. Like I think it was, you know, like sacred to my family to make sure that people knew. Unfortunately, they did not teach us Spanish like purposefully, which is very annoying.
Yeah, there's also that. Yeah, we can talk a little bit about that, because I got my master's in teaching English to speakers of other languages, and I think a part of me wanted to understand why it was so important to learn English in our culture. And I think English is like a tool that allows you socioeconomic mobility in the world and access to much better opportunities. So I think that's why English is so important. But I think that in New York City, there's an adaptation of the culture that's in the islands. I don't think it's the same, but it's definitely adapted.
I agree 150%.
And like, it's definitely very beautiful, but also like you can disconnect in a way where you're like, life takes you in a direction that's less connected to your culture. And I think that's just naturally part of like being educated in the United States. Like you lose a little bit of your culture and your identity.
And then it can, I feel like it can be easily like twisted and turned into something that it's not. Like, but because people don't know, like they believe it. Like there's some things that there was extreme culture shock as soon as I got here because like I realized everybody was so black. I was like, there's all these black people here. Like I never because when I grew up, like I grew up with Dominicans saying, I'm not black, I'm Dominican. Like I'm like something that was so completely different from blackness, and I was like, whoa, like these people are not. I was expecting to experience like not what I experienced, and I feel like so much love, so much care, like. People identify with me, like they identify with my blackness, like we are on the same page in a way that I could go to some places in New York City right now and they'll be like, I'm not sure, like this is interesting what you're doing, but majority of the culture, like I definitely think there's a colorism here, but I feel like this is an extremely black country. Lots of African, there's a black consciousness, like people care about each other, like there's this ancestral history that I can feel, like
you
it's beautiful, it feels very good, like it feels amazing, and I was so surprised that